This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you all for tuning into this part one of the FY21 budget presentation. I thank you all for tuning into last week's downtown development presentation. Again, we're going to continue to record city staff presentations over the next few weeks to limit the time spent physically at public meetings due to COVID-19. I'm hoping to record part two of this presentation early next week. My goal with this presentation is to give you a broad overview of the budget, focusing on both the impacts of COVID-19 on our FY20 through FY22 budgets and the potential impact of the downtown on the 10-year model. Once again, like I did last week, just a reminder, please email your comments and questions about the budget or even the downtown as well to City Clerk Lana Connor at l.connor@manassasparkva.gov, and she's going to provide that to our Mayor Jeanette Rochelle, who will be able to read it out loud at our public meetings. Again, please provide your name and address when sending your comments so that your message can be read into the record. We'll record the meeting in case you can't listen the evening of the meeting, and we'll post it on YouTube with a link from our city website. So again, feel free to email us any comments and questions you have after the meeting. Our plan is to continue to live stream our meetings like we did this past Tuesday's meeting. Feel free to send us comments via Facebook Live or the YouTube comment section, via email, or you can even call in during the meeting as well. For COVID-19 specific questions, please call the Prince William Health District call center at 703-872-7759 or the Virginia Department of Health at 703-ASK-BDH3. For food support to our senior citizens, residents with underlying health conditions per the CDC, or the unemployed, please call our city COVID-19 hotline at 703-335-8802. or feel free to email us at cmp-food@manassasparkva.gov. So the agenda for this presentation will start with a description of the governing body's guidance to staff on the budget. This guidance was done prior to COVID-19, and thus the governing body has directed that two budgets be developed, and I'll go over both budgets, but essentially one is considered a pre-COVID-19 budget with some of the things that we wanted to accomplish, while the second budget is a flat budget directly in response to the COVID-19 recession. Again, I'll be going over both budgets tonight. I'll present an initial overview of the potential impact of the COVID-19 recession and what that will do to our revenues, and then what action the city's already taken and what we're going to continue to do as a result of these impacts. I'll then provide an executive overview of the two budgets along with the enterprise budgets. The enterprise budgets aren't necessarily impacted by COVID-19. Where they are impacted would be whenever we do pay raises or other general fund increases in spending. Some of those funds directly support the enterprise funds. For example, the IT department who does their IT or payroll, the treasurer who does the billing for the enterprise funds. Those services are directly supporting the enterprise funds. So when we make some changes to the general fund in terms of pay increases, that does impact the enterprise fund. So the decisions we make with the general fund will have some impacts on the enterprise funds, but it's not directly COVID-19 that's going to have any impacts on those specific budgets. I'll then present an overview of both budgets presented, the flat budget and the budget, the pre-COVID-19 budget, along with a 10-year financial model based on the downtown development proposal. We'll actually have two 10-year financial models this year. In previous years, we've only had one. This year, we'll have two based off of the downtown proposal. Again, in this presentation, I'll go over the overview of these two models and two budgets, and then for part two next week, we'll actually spend a little bit more time going into the details of that. So for this presentation, you can see the red box here. These are the items that will be discussed. And then for part 2, we'll go over the general fund budget in more detail, including debt and reserves. We'll go over the enterprise funds, the water and sewer fund, the stormwater fund, and the solid waste fund. And then I'm going to walk us through both budget spreadsheets. We'll have the flat spreadsheet and then the spreadsheet with the actual spending increases. But I want to be able to provide an explanation of how to read that spreadsheet so you can do your own evaluation. And then I'll go over next steps actually at the end of this presentation, and I'll update those next steps for part 2 if there's any changes. So in terms of the governing body priorities, the top 10, there was a lot of ties this year, so we're actually showcasing 12 of the top priorities of the governing body. Number 1 was the pursuit of city center phases 3 and 4, essentially the downtown development proposal that we're evaluating right now. Just a little bit of background on these priorities. The priorities were provided by each governing body member, and then we tallied them all into one spreadsheet and provided that to the governing body as a survey. Each governing body member did the survey and then returned it back to staff, and then we tallied the total numbers to see which ones received the highest score. Here on this column here, we talk about whether these budgets are accomplished or not via the 10-year models or directly the FY21 models. You can see that about 10 out of the 12 of the governing body priority items were able to be accomplished. For this rank number 1 item, there is a current proposed downtown development. We just had a public hearing on that this past Tuesday, and the expected vote is on May 5th. The 2 10-year models were actually developed. One of the models includes the downtown development, so I'm able to demonstrate what the financial impact is of that in this budget. So it was accomplished, and we're going to continue to work on attracting businesses as well if the proposal is approved. And even beyond the proposal, in other areas of the city, we're going to continue to pursue business development. Priority number 2 was to continue to build reserves to the best of the city's budget ability. Again, like the last few years, we do that, and we show what the long-term model looks like for our reserves and when we actually achieve our reserve goals. Tied for 2 is also a balanced budget as well. This is a maybe, and I say maybe because there's going to have to be a use of fund balance over the next 2 years due to the COVID-19 recession. The fund balance that we have, we've been calling our rainy day fund. And the purpose of the rainy day fund is to utilize during recessions in order to keep your steady state operations and not impact service levels to residents. Number 4, continued collection efforts for delinquent taxes. That's really part of the software enhancements that we've been doing, but also just the aggressive approach that our treasurer has taken. You'll see in this budget that we'll continue to forecast the total delinquency still outstanding for real estate and personal property tax, and when we believe we'll be able to collect those taxes. Staff raises was a top priority as well, a tie for number 5. There was 2 actual staff raises on this survey. You can see the first one is whatever's feasible, and then the second one down here was a minimum of 4 to 5%. So what was feasible was ranked higher than the minimum of 4 to 5%, and that of course is accomplished via the 2 budget models and also the 10-year models, which project the schedule of salary increases. Also tied for 5th was continuing what we've started with the best practices and sustainable fiscal policies. That's still built into how we're doing this budget with the long-term fiscal stress testing that we do with the 10-year model. Those are key components that allowed us to reestablish our credit score with S&P and Moody's, and also to build confidence in the state that we weren't fiscally distressed, but that we were aware of our financial challenges and had the right strategy in place to deal with those challenges head on. And this budget continues those best practices and continues to delineate reserve strategies and debt management strategies as well. Continuing to pursue robust strategic and sustainable economic development. That's very similar to the first priority, but this is just general across the city. Beyond the downtown, you also have the Route 28 area as well, where we have some property that we're trying to establish a business presence. You'll see specifically in the city manager budget, we have a section of continued funding for economic development support, and I plan on bringing proposals to the governing body for continued consultant support as well. Number 8 was that minimum of 4 to 5% increase in city staff salaries. Unfortunately, we were not able to accomplish that in FY21. Even if there was no recession, I'm not sure we would have the revenue base to do so this year. We probably could with the assessment increase, but because a recession would simply come in a few years, it would be recommended against. We need to get over this recession and before we can proceed with more robust spending increase and pay raises and tax cuts, because our reserve position will be much stronger in preparation for the next recession in 10 years down the road. No cut to core services was number 9, and we did do that. There was no cut to core services. There was simply scaling back of increases. So it's considered even the flat budget model. None of the core services were cut. You will see that the social services department budget has gone down, but that has to do with less CSA spending and not necessarily the decrease in departmental spending. Prioritizing capital projects, we do that. Unfortunately, there had to be cuts from the CIP model that was presented to the Planning Commission just a few weeks ago, but we're at least preserving the funding that was established in last year's model for the CIP. Capital infrastructure was one of the top priorities of our residents in the 5 town halls that we held back in December, where we talked about the downtown, but we also discussed other issues and provided surveys. And in those surveys, residents made it clear that they want to see an improved infrastructure in our city, along, of course, with tax cuts as well. Providing quality library services, that was also tied with the capital projects at number 10, along with the continual improvement of the city software at number 10. We continue to do that. You'll see the new library model for budgets. Now that we have our own city library, you'll see scaled back spending early on in the first few years. And then if the downtown library is established, then you can see a ramp up of library spending back to the county levels, but where we have full control. And then continual improvement of the city financial software. We're still doing those enhancements this fiscal year, and we plan on evaluating other software improvements outside of the ERP, but that make the ERP function better for the city. So that remained in the CIP as well. Specifically, going back to some of these key highlights, the use of reserves are going to be needed for COVID-19. That's why, again, this was a maybe, and you'll see that here in the next slide. Pay raises in the flat budget is deferred. We may have to defer them throughout FY21 as a recommendation, but certainly my recommendation is to defer them right now and to reevaluate in December, determine what the actual COVID-19 recession implications will be before we take action. Then lastly, the downtown development is still on course per the rank number 1 priority here. And again, I'm showing 2 models, 2 10-year financial models, one with a downtown and one without. So specifically with COVID-19 and the recession impacts, still very unclear at this state, at this time, what the actual impacts will be. I think we're going to have a clearer picture this summer when we start seeing the percentages of revenue decline for our commercial revenue. And then in the fall, when we actually determine what the duration of the recession will be. Is it going to just last right now while everything is shut down and then we're going to rebound quickly? Or are there going to be negative multiplier effects across the economy that are going to continue to drag the economy down over the foreseeable future? So we have to really pay attention to what's happening with the economy over the next few months to determine what the actual impacts are going to be. Early assessments for the FY20 budget, we're forecasting a potential loss of $650,000 in commercial tax revenues. That's roughly a 15% loss. And then $350,000 in Parks and Rec revenues. We're assuming that we're not going to be able to reopen for the remainder of the fiscal year. Currently, the governor's executive order extends out through June 10th. It's not clear if that's going to be extended further. If we can open up after June 10th, then this 350,000 drop will go down slightly. Despite these two losses, we still are projecting the budget to be balanced. This is a combination of a few things. We have implemented tight spending controls, really focused on COVID-19 response, and we've done a partial hiring freeze, so it really has to be critical positions to backfill for the turnover so we can keep our budgets low. The other big thing that happened in FY20 is we received nearly $500,000 from the county as part of the boundary line adjustment deal that was negotiated about a year ago. So that money essentially served as a rainy day fund infusion in FY20. For the FY21 budget, we're forecasting a potential loss of $770,000 in commercial tax revenues. That's a 20% loss. There's not a lot of available data out there, but some of what we have seen has ranged in this 20% figure in terms of loss of commercial revenues over the next year. Overall revenues are going down by nearly $400,000 for the general fund specifically. So even though you see here this $770,000 drop, it's only going down by $400,000, and that has to do with a stronger real estate assessment picture and also personal property tax growth that came from the implementation of the annual decal programs. Both of those revenue streams help to cushion this falling revenue because you don't only have falling commercial revenues, there's also been some impacts on departmental revenues as well from reduction in court fines, reduced CSA funding, and other things as well. So you have this combination of falling departmental revenues that are not related to COVID-19 combined with the fall in commercial tax revenues that are a direct result of COVID-19 recession. But thanks to stronger real estate and personal property tax figures, it cushions this dramatic decrease in revenues, and we're only expected to decrease revenues by $400,000. Again, these are our best forecasts for right now. The recommendation again is to hold off on major decisions until December, or our standard mid-year budget timeframe, when we have a much clearer picture again of how much revenue is declining and how long is that revenue decline going to last. This is going to be a 3-year impact. So for FY22, we're forecasting potential loss of over $1 million due to expected decline in assessments, especially when you're talking about commercial properties. With declining commercial sales, you'll likely see a devaluation in the assessed property values there. Hopefully it would only impact one assessment and won't carry over into FY23. But because we're so dependent on real estate taxes as the largest source of revenue for the city, any minor percentage adjustments down or up result in a large impact to the city. So you see this year with the percentages growing by 5%, that generated over $1 million in new revenues to the city to help cushion us. Well, a decline of 5% would then reverse about $1 million as well. So again, this will be potentially a 3-year fiscal impact. Sticking with the model that was developed last year and the increases forecasted there, we would need to utilize about $1.5 million in FY21 in our fund balance. Our fund balance position right now is just over $1.7 million. So we would have to deplete the majority of the fund balance over FY21 and FY22 of $1.5 million if we stuck with the current models of spending. This is why the governing body directed me to develop a flat budget alternative as well. With that flat budget alternative, we end up utilizing approximately $1.1 million over the next 2 years out of the $1.7 million. So it preserves roughly a $600,000 cushion for the city in case the recession is worse. So what can be done and has been done already? So the governing body and the city staff, we've been preparing for the likelihood of recession to hit our nation. Recessions since World War II have come roughly every 8 to 10 years, so we were already due to have a recession. So what we've done over the last few years in preparation for this, we've actually built our reserve position via budget surpluses. Our reserve position in FY16 was actually in a negative position, negative $1.1 million. And it's again now up to a positive $1.7 million, just over $1.7 million at the end of FY19. So we accomplished a lot of these surpluses through across the board cuts. Significant across the board cuts were done in FY18, and we've been deferring a lot of the capital infrastructure spending, trying to push that back to FY23 where possible. In FY23 is where we have a significant drop in our annual debt payments. So we've been taking that approach to build up the reserves. Over the last few years, the city specifically has generated $1.2 million in budget surpluses, and the schools provided an additional $500,000, just over $500,000 in FY19 as well in surpluses to help build up this reserve position for use as a rainy day fund. Debt refinancing. So over the last year, the governing body directed staff to pursue debt refinancing. We were able to accomplish roughly $2.2 million in savings, taking advantage of lower interest rates. This $2.2 million is saved across FY20 through 22, so across 3 fiscal years. As part of that effort, we had to reestablish our credit with S&P and Moody's, so we had to establish policies and right strategies to fix our finances in order to be able to do that. And this debt financing essentially refinancing serves as rainy day fund support as well, in addition to the fund balance that we've been able to develop over the last few years. Again, this debt refinancing doesn't defer debt to future years. It simply reduces our overall debt by reducing the interest rates that we're paying on our debt, taking advantage of lower interest rates. And we were able to front load those savings over these from FY20 through 22 in preparation for FY23, where the annual debt payments would drop anyways. Other actions, I mentioned the boundary line adjustment agreement with the county that infused the city with just under $500,000 in cash, and also brought us a beautiful park in Blooms Park, which I know a lot of residents are taking advantage of while they're stuck at home for recreation right now and exercise. And we've also saved over $500,000 over these next 2 fiscal years from the decision that we made to withdraw from the library system from the county and to establish our own library in the city as well. So this is what we've already done to prepare for what we saw was coming. Continued next steps. We may have to scale back spending increases that we were hoping to be able to do in FY21 and 22, maybe just for FY21, maybe just for half of the year of FY21, but potentially across 2 fiscal years if necessary. And why across the 2 fiscal years is we'll get the updated assessment data next March, and that will be the assessment data that demonstrates what the COVID-19 recession impact is going to be on residential and commercial property values. We'll continue to pursue debt refinancing opportunities when they become available, with the Federal Reserve continuing to cut interest rates. There might be some opportunities. We've already done a lot of aggressive refinancing, so I'm not sure if there's any opportunities, but we'll continue to work with our financial advisors to see where that is possible. So even though this news may be depressing to hear about the losses of revenue impacting the city and scaled back spending plans that we had, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for our residents, for staff of the governing body. In FY23, I mentioned this before, our annual debt payments will decline by $1.5 million. That'll be a nice infusion of cash and budget support in FY23. More importantly, there's a proposal right now for significant downtown development that's projected to generate over $30 million in extra revenue from FY22 through FY30 to really put us in a positive strong financial future. So through smart financial management and strong economic development, we'll get through what we're facing right now, and the future for the city will be a bright one. As previously stated, the governing body directed me to prepare two FY21 budgets for the city to evaluate. The first one being what's termed the flat budget. What this one is that there's no spending increases with the exception of those areas where we have little to no discretion. The example being health insurance premiums that the city's being charged, retirement benefits. Another example specifically from the police department and fire department is new uniforms and training that's required due to the high turnover rates that we have. These are just some examples of non-discretionary spending increases. The second budget is what we were going to develop pre-COVID-19 recession. We're calling this the 2% budget in this presentation since it incorporates a 2% raise for city employees for the city's current financial model. It also includes other discretionary spending increases that departments have identified as necessary for provision of services to residents. Fortunately, with the flat budget, a lot of those will be scaled back. Both of these budgets are very tight. Again, the plan was to keep tight budgets until FY23, FY24, when the debt position of the city would drop and potentially the downtown development would begin to bear fruit in terms of new revenues. As stated also before, we're preparing two 10-year financial models. These financial models are fiscal stress tests to determine how we're doing as a city in the long run, what decisions we're making today will do to the future of the city, and do we need to make any adjustments to deal with deficits, or how do we manage surpluses? That's the goal of the 10-year financial model, and we prepared two models this year. The last 2 years budgets for the 10-year models, I have assumed a downtown development because that was a strategy that we were pursuing as a city. And if you look at the last 2 years budget presentations, you'll notice in some of the charts, there's been like a pinkish red highlighted area that says with downtown development. So our reserves, the budget growth, the salary increases that are enabled. I highlighted over the last few years specifically how those were enabled due to downtown development. This year, now that we're so much closer and we actually have deals in front of us, we're able to forecast what the actual revenues may look like based off of square footages and total development. So for this year, because there's still no final approval of the downtown development deals, I'm presenting two 10-year financial models, one assuming that the downtown development doesn't happen, and the other one assuming that it does. In order to not create four models, I simply lumped together the flat budget for FY21 with the no downtown development option, and I lumped together the 2% budget with the downtown development. That doesn't mean that that's what we have to do. There could certainly be a flat budget approved for FY21 and the downtown agreement developed. It's just I didn't want to develop four budgets right now. When the governing body makes their decision on where they want to go in terms of FY21 and FY22, in terms of a flat budget or the 2% budget, will be, and also the decision on the downtown development, will be better able to finalize the actual budget spreadsheet with a 10-year model that accurately reflects the direction that we're heading in. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to show both FY21 budgets, the flat budget and the 2% budget, and also the two 10-year financial models. These will be discussed and compared. And for this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview, and then in next week's part 2, we'll go into even further detail. So the executive summary for FY21, there's going to be two for the general fund, one for the flat budget, and then one for the 2% budget. For the flat budget, you'll see that the general fund budget is decreasing by $1.9 million. That's a 4% decrease. This is driven by two factors. One is the decrease in revenues that I mentioned before of $400,000, and the other is the decrease in transportation spending of $1.5 million, over $1.5 million. Since the transportation projects are funded via transportation funding sources, when you spend less on transportation projects, then you also receive less revenues. So they really offset each other. So you have over $1.5 million less spending in transportation and over $1.5 million less in revenue. It's not very helpful to lump transportation spending with everything else because the numbers are so much bigger than everything else we do in the city, and they vary so much. So for example, this decrease spending assumes that we will complete all the projects that we have slated for FY20. That's likely not going to be the case. So a lot of those FY20 projects will then simply carry over into FY21, and they'll be part of the FY21 budget amendment showing how much was carried over. So specifically for the general fund budget, not including the transportation, again, you have the decreased revenues of $400,000. Fortunately, again, as I mentioned before, with the debt refinancing in FY21, we're saving $700,000 in annual debt service from that debt refinancing. So that offsets this $400,000 in revenue loss and gives us an extra $300,000 to help with some of the spending increases. And you can see the spending increases from the departments is roughly $545,000, paid for again by the surplus in debt savings, plus some additional areas in the budget that you'll see in the spreadsheet, including the decline in expenditures from the county. There's also, as mentioned previously, a 5% increase in assessments and personal property tax collection. That's roughly about $1.1 million that helped cushion the loss in both departmental revenues and then also the COVID-19 recession implications as well. Departmental spending increases are driven largely by rising healthcare costs, as I mentioned earlier. This 5% increase in healthcare premiums, about $128,000 cost the city, and then VRS retirement costs, which are growing by 2% or $163,000. For the 2% budget, you see that there's a $500,000 increase in the 2% budget compared to the flat budget. That's paid for by the use of fund balance. So we're spending roughly $500,000 in fund balance in the 2% budget compared to $100,000 in fund balance in the flat budget. This enables a 2% pay raise, which costs the city $263,000. Other line item increases that were sought out by the departments of $192,000 total across all departments. But the total operating spending increases from all the departments about $1 million. That also includes the schools. So for the schools, the 2% model restores the full $185,000 increase to the schools. So that's the city transfer portion to the schools. In the flat budget, the schools received $67,000 less in transfer, so for a total of $118,000 compared to the model transfer or the 2% model of $185,000 increase. In the next few slides, I'll actually cover the actual increases for the overall school budget. So while the city budget's decreasing due to COVID-19 recession implications, the overall schools budget is actually increasing significantly due to external sources of funding. So in both of these budgets, I know this bullet point is part of the 2% budget, but this is reality for both 2% and the flat budget. There's a $1.2 million contribution to capital spending. That's in line with the model that was established last year. That has been preserved because we've been deferring capital for so long. It's becoming very difficult to do so. However, we have cut $350,000 in capital spending since we presented the initial CIP proposal to the Planning Commission a few weeks ago. We're going to be presenting the updated CIP to the Planning Commission in a few weeks and to the governing body as well. For the enterprise funds, the no water and sewer rate increase in FY21, we've been holding off rate increases for a few years now. The total average annual rate increases will be around 4% per year over 10 years, but that's going to start in FY23 as the fund balance continues to go down. There's a 600,000 spending increase in FY21 you'll see in the water and sewer budget. That's mainly due to capital infrastructure project spending ramp up, but also there's one additional position being requested, and that's the backflow prevention tech. Before I describe what that is, I just want to mention again, just like for the transportation projects, any water and sewer or any enterprise project budget in FY20 that's not completed will roll over to FY21. So these numbers again are subject to change when we do our mid-year budget review. Specifically with the backflow prevention tech, this is a position that's being proposed in the water and sewer enterprise fund. That is, it's not going to impact the general fund. The community development director, Calvin Odell, will highlight the rationale in more depth during his recorded presentation in the next few weeks. But again, this is not going to impact the general fund. It's specifically for the water and sewer fund. The city was cited last summer by the Department of Health for not having a cross-connection program. So the Virginia Code requires the health departments to permit localities to manage water systems. This permit lays out certain obligations that we have, including a backflow prevention and cross-connection program. Unprotected connections can lead to contamination of our water system. So with the Public Works Department being depleted due to the Great Recession, they saw major reductions in staffing in 2009. They have not had dedicated staff for this function since 2009. So they used to have this position to do this program, and they haven't had that since 2009. They've been understaffed, so something that has not had the attention that it deserves. This past year, we identified one connection that we didn't even know about that was actually due a lot of money to us. So that's what happens when you don't have a dedicated person evaluating your connections. So we do need to evaluate all connections on a regular basis to ensure compliance with our permit, and that's what this backflow prevention tech position would do. And again, our community development director will be able to elaborate in greater detail than I did on the importance of that position. And just as a reminder, it will not impact the general fund at all, just the water and sewer budget, which as a reminder has a very strong fund balance position right now. For stormwater, continued rate increases, 4% in FY21. As a reminder, this is not a voluntary program that the city is pursuing, but it's being mandated by the federal EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality to reduce pollutant loads from our stormwater. We're going to have heavy borrowing in FY23. Hopefully a revenue bond tied to the stormwater fees to take on the largest stormwater project, which is the Russia Branch stream restoration. You'll see that the average annual rate increases have gone up by 1% from last year's model, and that has to do with increased cost projections of this the Russia Branch stream restoration project. So our only solution here, for those who are not happy about this program and the costs, the burden that it has on our residents and our businesses in terms of paying the stormwater fee, the only solution really is to push the federal and state departments of environmental protection to ease their pollutant reduction mandates, to either ease it or to defer these mandates to the 2030s to give us more time to save up funding for these projects. Or probably the best solution is just like the transportation projects, where the federal and state resources provide at least 50% of the funding. That would help out with these projects as well. If they could at least cover 50% of the stream restoration project, that would allow us to reduce the rates that we're charging for stormwater and help out our residents and businesses. But until those things are accomplished, this will continue to be a burden, an unfunded mandate from the federal and state government on our city. Solid waste fund, you see the increase for FY21, and then the average annual increases over 10 years. I just want to caveat that these solid waste numbers will need to be evaluated after the waste transfer station is established in our city. We do expect a drop in the increases in the contract expenses and other areas in the solid waste fund, such as the hazardous waste expenditures, as a result of the waste transfer station. Plus, we expect new revenues to be generated from the waste transfer station itself. I'm going to recommend that the majority of these new revenues go towards our transportation infrastructure due to the increased vehicle load on our streets from the waste transfer station. However, some of this revenue can be shifted to help reduce the solid waste rates that we have on our residents. But until we get a better picture of what these actual revenues will be and the decreased costs once the waste transfer station is established, we're sticking with the status quo budget. But I'm hopeful that during the next 12 months, we'll get a better picture of what the positive benefits will be for the waste transfer station. Over the next few slides, I'll spend some time giving you an overview of the total city budget. That's the general fund budget, the schools budget, transportation, the enterprise funds, the water and sewer, stormwater, and solid waste. Actually show you some of the numbers and also do a deep dive on the fund balance positions, some debt analysis as well, and then what the impact will be on the 10-year financial model for the downtown as it pertains to departmental budgets. So when you look at the slide here, this lays out the overall city budget. Again, you'll see here in this column lays out all of the programs for the city. The top portion where you see this green and above are the revenue categories for the city, and then below the revenue categories we have all the different expenditures broken down by department, by things like debt, capital, water and sewer, stormwater, etc. Down here you have the total expenses. So this is for FY20, and then this is for FY21. So I mentioned that the total budget is, or the city general fund budget is decreasing, but the total budget continues to increase by around 1.39%. This is the flat budget. So in the 2% budget, the growth will be even higher. But the reason why it grows, two factors. You see that the water and sewer enterprise fund budget is growing by $557,000. But the most important is that the education school system spending is increasing by 6%, or $2.8 million. So you see the total increase in the city budget is 1.3 million, but the schools is 2.7 million. So if the schools didn't increase by that much, you would actually be in a negative overall position. Just want to highlight a few sections on this slide. Again, you can see the economic development revenues and the department revenues. We're taking a big hit next year. This one due to forecasted recession that we're in due to COVID-19. And this one due to decreases, the biggest one of course being for Parks and Rec, where last year we received the boundary line adjustment funds that were acquired via the Blooms Park boundary line adjustment. That of course you have a roughly $500,000 change or decrease from FY20 down to FY21, but other revenues are also going down. CSA is a big one. You also have court fines for the police department. They're just becoming less effective in collections of court fines. And then EMS cost recovery continues to go down as well as the county and the city of Manassas increase their capabilities to respond to calls outside of our city. So the share of our calls outside the city continue to go down. That's good in terms of having our fire department having more time to focus on our residents. It's bad in terms of a revenue implications, where we're losing revenues from less calls outside the city. Again, for the schools, you can see how much this $1.6 million represents the projected increase from state, federal sources, along with the organizational sources such as the cafeteria fund as well. So their revenue sources are increasing by $1.6 million, which is even larger than the total increase from both real estate and personal property of $1.2 million. So now we have to wait and see, is there going to be any implications from the state as a result of COVID-19 and reduced funding? The hope is that it's not. As part of the federal stimulus bill, there was a education support fund that was established, which 60% of that is supposed to go for K through 12. So my hope is that the state will continue its funding support for the schools so that they can have this increase in available revenue for their budget for next year. As you can see with the rest of the city, we just have depleted revenues at this point. Now the increase in the school's spending, it's $927,000 more than the financial model when it comes to when we see the 2% model. It's even more. I'm sorry, it's less than that when you're looking at the flat. I'm sorry, it's more than that when you're looking at the flat budget. So you can see that their budget's growing by almost $2.8 million, but their revenues are only growing by 1.6 million. Therefore, this is what the generated deficit is for the total city budget position because of the school budget growing at a much larger amount than what their revenues grew by and what the city provides to the schools in terms of transfer. But again, you see every other department has minimal increases or actual decreases. So the city's just not able to make up this gap that the schools are requesting. So my recommendation to the governing body is going to be to budget and appropriate that much less if we go with the flat budget to the schools in order to maintain our funding position. But again, luckily, the schools should be receiving a significant amount of revenues from the state and federal government so that their budget will grow despite the rest of the city budget actually going down. Other areas to highlight, you see this increase in spending on city capital infrastructure, despite the $350,000 decrease from the presentation of the Planning Commission. You still do have an increase in capital spending from FY20, but that was per the model that we established last year in terms of capital requirements. And then the water and sewer fund is also increasing. You'll see in the actual spreadsheet that there is a ramp up in capital infrastructure spending for our water and sewer system as the system continues to age and as the department wants to continue to speed up robust improvements to the system to minimize all the failures that we've been seeing. And lastly, I want to note that although the Parks and Rec Department budget appears to be growing by this large number, just note that that's actually $250,000 of that is actually the library, which was shifted from the general fund other category. It used to be part of the contributions to the county. That was removed from that section and shifted up to this section. So in reality, the Parks and Rec Department budget's increasing by 85,000, not by 335,000. And then just of note, there is minimum wage increase legislation that takes effect on July 1st, and that's one of the drivers as well of the increase. Those are one of the mandatory spending increases that we have as well for Parks and Rec. This next slide is the same slide as the previous one, but this one is the 2% budget. So you can see that the deficit here goes down compared to the previous one because you have an increase spending contribution to the schools. So the total budget you can see increases in the 2% model compared to the flat budget model. Highlights for this slide. So you can see that increase from a revenue standpoint in the previous slide of 98.1 million, now up to 98.7 million. That was largely funded by increased usage of fund balance. That increased usage of fund balance enables the increase in expenditures for the departments. In reality, it's to fund the 2% employee raise, as well as to reestablish the full funding per the model to our school system as well. Just want to caveat that the pay raises for the social services department, just like for schools, is really going to be dependent on what the state approves. We've seen some numbers looks like 1.5% pay raises from the state, but we believe that that might be a match requirement, that the city may do 1.5%. We're planning 2% here. So if we do 1.5%, then the state would match an additional 1.5%, or it could be that the state's providing the 1.5% and then, or 1.5% reimbursable. So if we do 2%, then they reimburse 1.5%. We still need to get more details on that, but again, here's the 2% model. Even if we go back to the flat budget model, if the state is going to authorize the pay raise funding, we certainly want to take advantage of that for our social services department to enable their pay raises. For this slide, what we're looking at here is the fund balance positions for the city across all the different funds. The general fund includes the city departments plus the school total position. Here you have the water and sewer position, the stormwater position, the solid waste position, and then the total city position, which I added this year that I didn't have in the analysis last year. So fund balance and cash are different, but they're related. So fund balance is the cash you would have in the bank if you received everything that was owed to you and you paid all the bills that you owed, what your position would be at the end of the year once you did that. So the larger the fund balance is, and assuming you're doing well with your receivables and payables, the stronger your cash position is as well. So they're related, but they're not the same thing. But you can see here, this is the flat budget model. And as a reminder, this model does not include major renovations to the public works and the city hall building. I'm sorry, this is the no downtown model. That's also the flat budget model and the no downtown model. But we're not assuming that we're making the renovations to the city hall building and public works building, which for the case of the public works building is not a realistic assumption. But I didn't want to include that here because we don't have projections for what that would actually cost for us to do. But assuming it's a few $1,000,000, you can subtract that few $1,000,000. Let's say if we have to do it by FY26, subtract the few millions of dollars from this number, the total position weakens significantly. But by not doing the downtown, you're not generating the revenue to deal with the public works facility requirements. Therefore, you're taking it out of this revenue here. But you can see that the fund balance position for the city will decrease over the next few years to deal with the recession, but then we'll start to bounce back in FY23 when the city position improves. It continues on a trajectory of reserve buildup. A resident had a question at the last public hearing about what the plan is for building up reserves if there is no downtown. Well, we still have a plan. We're still able to do it. It's just you'll see when you compare this to the next slide, it's not going to be as robust. It won't get us to the positions where we need to be, but we'll certainly be in a much better position than what we are today. You can see in FY30, the projected $11 million. Again, I'd likely subtract a few million out of that for public works facility renovations and potentially city hall renovations. But we're in a much better position when you compare that to where we are in FY21, FY22, or the fund balance position, or going back to FY18 or even FY16 when we were in a negative position. So we're still heading in a positive trajectory, regardless of whether we pursue the downtown or not. But you'll see with the next slide what the large gap is in terms of a better financial position that we can be with the 10-year financial model based off of approval of the downtown initiative. One big change from last year is you can see that there's a ramp up in water and sewer capital spending. The water and sewer fund actually has the healthy fund balance for the city right now. It's the one that's enabling this total city position and the cash that we have in the bank to make payroll and to pay our accounts payable. Essentially, the water and sewer fund has been subsidizing on a cash basis, not a fund basis, because it gets all reimbursed, but on a cash basis during the year, it's almost served as a bank because it has a very strong and healthy position. But the plan was for that position is to spend it down with capital spending to improve the water and sewer infrastructure system that we have And you can see this year there's a ramp up in that spending so that the fund balance drops even further and faster than what it did in last year's model. And that's a good thing in terms of improving the infrastructure of our city's water and sewer system. But it's bad in terms of the general fund balance doesn't grow quick enough to cover for that. So what you see is between FY21 and FY27, we're going to have some cash issues, and unfortunately, we're likely going to have to stay in these short-term cash note programs to manage our cash position during the year. During this time, our only option would be to defer the water and sewer system improvements to beyond this time frame to keep a healthy cash position, but that would be in counter to what we want to do to improve our water and sewer system. So that's a really tricky situation that the city's in terms of needing to improve its infrastructure, but also maintain the cash position. And that's why a quicker buildup of the general fund balance position is important for all funds across the city to let us do what we need to do in terms of an infrastructure standpoint. You can see the stormwater fund has a buildup of fund balance, and then in FY23 we start the stream restoration project, and that fund balance begins to drop before kind of balancing out in order to enable us to pay the long-term debt that we're going to owe as a result of the stream restoration project. The solid waste, the trash fund, is actually in a negative position. It has been. That negative position has been dropping each year until we get it to a positive position in FY27. And at this point, either we have the requisite funding to deal with major escalations in contract prices that may happen in the market, or if those aren't happening, then you can significantly reduce your trash fee rate, which is part of your water and sewer bill. So when you see the water and sewer bill, just note it's not just the water and sewer that's the total bill. You're also paying the trash as well. So the goal is if you can to reduce that rate. Once you get to this healthy position, you can do so. I'm hopeful that the waste transfer station and recycling center will help us do that even quicker. Again, we don't get to a real strong cash position until FY30. You can see even in FY28, 29, they're somewhat comparable to where we've been over the last 2 years, and even over the last 2 years, we've had to do some cash borrowing during the year as well. So this is an issue, potential issue that we need to figure out, and it's either scaling this back or figuring out how to increase this even further. Now this is assuming the downtown gets approved and is implemented, this is the 10-year model. And just for reference, you can see FY30, the position is nearly $26 million compared to in the no downtown model, you're at $11 million. You're talking about a $16 million improvement in overall position, and you can see that the cash issues are at a much shorter extent. So you still see the water and sewer fund balance dropping through FY26 before it recovers, but the cash positions now are from FY21 through 25 compared from FY21 through 27. So we're saving a couple years of cash issues, and we're not dropping that low, and we're building up this cash position much quicker. So even if we make the decision to defer some of this, with the downtown model, you don't have to defer it as much. And each year you defer it here, your total cash position improves dramatically because we're expecting tap fee revenues from those downtown developments. So the downtown development not only benefits the general fund, as you can see in the increased fund balance position, in the increased ability to do pay raises that you'll see in the downtown model, the increased ability to do tax cuts, again, that you'll see in the downtown model, but it also helps out the water and sewer enterprise fund by providing millions of dollars in tap fee revenues from these new developments that allows for that scaled up water and sewer infrastructure spending, and a portion of that also helps fund the new public works, or not the new, but the public works solution that we're looking at with utilizing general fund money as well, since the public works building or the Community Development Department building benefits all of these funds. Each of them has to contribute something, but right now we're only forecasting utilizing water and sewer funds and general fund money to spare the burden on the solid waste fund and the stormwater funds, which are much smaller. And in the case of the stormwater fund, has significant unfunded liabilities and mandates right now that need to be addressed. You can see the city gets to a strong cash position by FY27, so much larger than what we're dealing with right now. We can certainly abandon all short-term cash borrowing programs by that date, and you can see how much more healthy the city is in FY30, almost $32 million compared to $15 million. So you're almost doubling, you're over doubling your actual total city position with the downtown development. And again, this model here does not assume that we're spending anything on the public works renovations and city hall renovations. This one here actually includes the payments that we'd be making as part of the lease purchase acquisition for a brand new city hall building. So these numbers include that, and they still grow, and they include spending on the public works solution for acquisition of a building to service the public works to benefit all of these funds. These numbers, this growth is despite that spending. So we're at a much stronger financial position despite spending the funding on the lease purchase for City Hall and the public works building solution as well. That's the power of economic development. It lets you do all the things you want to accomplish in terms of spending, while also allowing for tax rate cuts as well. And with all of this program, what you'll see with the updated reserve position is we'll actually be higher in our reserve position than where we need to be. And that surplus money then frees up additional options for the governing body in terms of even deeper tax cuts or increased pay beyond the actual model or increased capital spending, tucking away that money for future renovations for the 4 schools, school buildings, the police station, the fire station. All those were built in the 2000s. They're going to need renovations in the 2030s or 2040s. We need to save money for that. So this model with the downtown development provides that surplus revenue to accomplish one of those goals or a combination of all those goals that I just laid out. Another important thing to look at is how does our cash asset or the fund balance, how does that match the debt liability that we have? So you can see in this table, the blue bars represent the outstanding debt that the city still has on its books. So the general obligation debt, what's actually defined as debt. You can see how that drops from FY21 down to FY30. It used to be where it stayed level and it just dropped in FY23, but you can now see with the, and actually it was level up here and it dropped dramatically in FY23, but you can see that the actual refinancing has helped as well. But more importantly here, you see the orange bars are the fund balance positions. This is the flat budget model, assuming no downtown development. You can see that the fund balance position never catches up to the debt position. So that means we owe more than what we're worth. With the downtown model, we're worth more than what we owe. So the fund balance position improves so dramatically that it actually overtakes our outstanding debt position, and we're a financially strong city at that point. What this slide is showing, again, this one is the flat budget model with no downtown development. And what this is showing is comparing the FY21 budget level for each department to the FY30. So this is the difference between the FY30 budget for example, the transfer to schools versus the FY21. So what this is saying is that in FY30, the city is transferring almost $1.8 million more to schools that year than it did in FY21, or 870,000 more to Parks and Rec than it did in FY21. A lot of that has to do with the library addition. And then police, the example here is 1.2 million, or almost 1.3 million more in FY30 than in FY21. The reason why you see increases throughout is again a pay raise. With the no downtown solution, unfortunately, we're stuck with average annual pay raises of 2.5%. With the downtown model, that grows to average annual increases of 3% pay raises. The next slide will show what the change is in contributions to each department in FY30 compared to FY21 with downtown development. What you can see here is that the total amount is higher, it's higher for every department. Remember, in this model, this assumes a 2% growth in FY21, so you're already starting at a higher number in 21, and so that what you're subtracting from FY30 to 21 is already at a higher position. So this growth is even bigger than what's actually shown on this slide, but you can see the biggest increase is for schools, and there's a reason for that. It's about $700,000 higher in FY30 than in the no downtown model. And the reason for that is if the state assesses the city's ability to pay or to contribute to our schools has dramatically improved because of our economic development position, they'll actually decrease the amount of funding that they're providing to the schools. That's not, doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be decreasing their contributions to the schools, but it could mean that they're decreasing the increase of the contribution. So instead of them giving $1 million more that year, they may give, 700,000 more. So they cut back like $300,000. So we need to prepare in the model to be able to provide a contribution to the schools higher, assuming the downtown is developed than the other model, to make up for that potential loss in revenue from the states. It's not something we have to do. We can continue to track and see, is the state really going to do that or not? If they don't, even better. Now we have additional revenues available for additional spending initiatives that want to be pursued by any of the departments, including schools, additional pay raises, or the priority right now for our residents, even a more robust tax cuts. But we have to wait and see what the states will actually do, assuming we develop the downtown and we improve our financial position. Again, like I mentioned in the previous slide, even with the increased budget for all the departments, there's still going to be a surplus of reserves in 2030 that's going to enable either deeper tax cuts, funding, for building renovations in the future, pay raises, or, as my recommendation would be, a combination of all these different elements. So in conclusion, when evaluating our fund balance position, our cash position, our total budget positions, our ability to do tax cuts, the downtown model promises a better future for the city, where we can do spending increases, all the while allowing tax rates to fall even further than they do in the no downtown model, and reserves to go up even further. It can be done mathematically, but you need increased economic development revenue to allow for all those things to happen at the same time. Decrease taxes, which decreases your revenue, while increasing spending, mathematically can only happen if you're improving your tax base. And that's what the downtown development allows, for more robust reserves, more robust tax cuts, more robust pay increases, and more robust contributions to all of our departments, including our school system as well. So just as a reminder, in this part one, I went over the governing body guidance, the impact from COVID-19 on our budget, provided an executive summary of the FY21 budget, and then provided a budget overview of both FY21 and where we're headed as a city over the next 10 years, really driven by the important decision of the downtown development that's going to be brought forward for vote on May 5th. Again, please send your comments to the governing body. They want to hear from you. That is why we did all of those town halls back in December, was to solicit input from the public on the downtown development initiative. So for part two, we're looking to discuss the general fund budget, going into overview of the budget itself, the debt, reserves, and CIP. And then we'll do the same thing for the enterprise budgets. And I want to spend some time going over the Excel spreadsheet. There's a lot of tabs, so I want to go through those tabs just so you have a good understanding of what's actually in the budget, and then further next steps. So part 2 of this presentation, the hope is to record this next week. We'll also be doing recordings, virtual presentations of our CIP project by project, so you have a good understanding of what the city is looking to do. The departments will also be recording their presentations, and then we'll be doing public input sessions over the next few weeks as well. We want to do that remotely if possible, but we are holding work sessions on April 14th and May 5th. We ask that you please email your comments to us in order to continue to follow social distancing. And we will read those comments out loud at these work session meetings. We'll also have the public hearing date on May 19th. So as we can, if any changes are made during this time, we'll let you know what's being discussed, and you can let us know your overall opinion on the budget and where you want to see the city headed on May 19th. Budget vote is expected in June, hopefully after the governor's order to stay home ends on June 10th. We'll have the budget amendment discussion and vote in December as part of our mid-year budget process. Again, we're looking to defer major decisions until that time, so we have a good understanding of what the actual impacts will be from COVID-19, both in scale and duration. And then a recommendation may be to wait on major decisions until March of 2021 when we get the assessment, the updated assessments based off the impact of the COVID-19 recessions. Short-term and medium-term decisions for the governing body, key decision points for them. It's going to be a decision on whether we want to do the flat budget right now, the 2% budget, hybrid, something else. Do we want to revisit this in December? What are the next steps that we need to take? There's a few positions, new positions that need to be decided on as well. I discussed the backflow prevention tech position that's part of the water and sewer fund that Calvin will discuss in his community development presentation. The registrar assistant, that's currently a part-time position. The request from the registrar is to make that a full-time as a result of all the new voting requirements, especially early voting requirements that are being laid on voter registrars' offices across the Commonwealth. The big decision is the downtown, the future financial success of the city. With that downtown, though, if that does get approved, then we do have to consider the hiring of a building official. You'll see the revenues will be there as part of the downtown development, all the inspection fees that the developers will be paying. We're going to need some additional robust inspection capabilities in the city to ensure we have the proper construction. So that's a position that the city manager is recommending is approved if the downtown is also approved as well. Medium-term decisions, when we get to December, do we want to even hold off then? You know, if there was a recession and it was deep, even if it was over there by then, is there going to be impacts on assessments that are being built in because of the recession? Do we need to hold off until that time to know what our true position is so we don't move the city into a negative fund balance position if we underestimate the impact of COVID-19 recession? Again, just a reminder, please email your comments to us about the budget. We're going to try to live stream. We will live stream these meetings and on cable TV as well. We'll try to record them on YouTube so you can watch them after the fact and send us your comments. And again, here are the helpful numbers for COVID-19. If you have any concerns, always reach out to your primary care doctor, reach out to the Prince William Health District Call Center, Virginia Department of Health, and then if you're a resident of the city and you're a senior citizen or a vulnerable population with underlying health conditions, or you're now unemployed because of these events, please call our COVID-19 hotline or email us so we can get you assistance. Thank you very much, and I will move to part 2 next week.